Thanks, David. Yeah, it's really wonderful to see all of you here. We are so excited about this program. As we know, as pastors and lay people, sometimes it is hard to talk about money in church. Shouldn't be, but it is, and we get ourselves in the way. And so we began this program with a thought toward everybody has something to learn with regard to preaching about stewardship. And what would it be like to have some really wonderful, highly experienced pastors who do this well, know it inside and out, come and share with us their views a little bit on major things to remember, signposts that they use, also to give an example of a sermon, and then give us a chance to follow up and to try to do all this in an hour, which means I'm going to just say a couple more words and then turn it over to Bob because it's not a lot of time. But if I could just open us with a prayer this morning. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we come to you this afternoon as your people. Thankful for all that we have, as we know that it is yours. It comes from you. And we come also today with thoughts of devastating tragedy in Texas, devastating tragedy in Buffalo, New York, as well as other places around the country. We hope and we sincerely ask that you not tire of our prayers and steel us for action to help change the situation. We also come with thoughts of war and the experiences overseas. All of this sometimes seems too much, and we ask you to be with us now as we breathe, as we be present for each other and ready to hear and learn from our guests this afternoon. We thank you for the blessing of our ministry together. Amen. Just a quick introduction of this remarkable man. The first time I met Bob Hill, I was just a brand new pastor. Somebody had dragged me to a course on learning about stewardship, and somehow Bob Hill showed up on the first day, and my jaw just dropped, and he expanded my mind with a lot of different thoughts about how to approach stewardship in a sermon. Not one particular way, but a lot of ways, depending on who your congregation is, what your context is, who you are, and how to make words authentic to you, and not to be afraid of talking about it. I don't think he reminded me at the time, but when I learned that 80% of the words Jesus spoke about in the parables had to do with money or property or possessions, it made it just visceral to me about how important this was. Anyway, I was green behind the ears then, and now periodically I have the good fortune to be able to talk with him. And every time I talk with him about ministry, I feel wet behind the ears again, and green as day, because the man knows more about ministry and his little finger than I know. And some of you have experienced that in his courses as well. So when we thought about this program, there was one person we knew he had to have, and graciously he said, I'll do it. So Bob, thank you very much. Many of you know him from his coursework, and of course his service as the dean at Marsh Chapel. He's also a member of another United Methodist conference. Not everybody knows that. So from our sisters, our siblings, over in the New York conference. So Bob, we are so thankful you're here. I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. Go ahead, Bob.
No, go ahead,
David,
David, did you want to say something? Are you okay?
Well, if you wanted to respond to some of the things that Ted said, and then I was going to start to talk about guideposts.
Yeah, Ted, thank you so much for your gracious words and your kind words and your friendship over the years and the leadership that you're bringing to the United Methodist Foundation of New England, which is really a bright spot and a leading part of our New England experience. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful to be around during a time when some new and ongoing things, but some new and exciting things are happening, including what you're doing here. And David, thank you for all the behind the scenes preparation. I don't think anyone will ever know all the detail that you've had to get into by getting us ready for all of this. And then just a quick across the board greeting. It makes me happy to recognize that of all on the screen, I know maybe half of you, or a third of you anyway, which for somebody who drifted across the Hudson River in 2006 into a fairly unknown area, that's good. I'm glad for that. And it makes me feel at home. And Jan and I, of course, have enjoyed very much our time working in the ministry at Marsh Chapel and Boston University. So, David, go ahead.
Oh, fantastic. And again, Bob, thanks very much for being here. And part of the Stewardship Preaching Institute, this program, is finding out the guideposts. What is it when you're going to be preaching on stewardship? What are 4, 5 guideposts that you use to put together the message, to choose the text? What is it that you're using as a way to make sure that the message hits on what's important?
And with that, I'm going to move fairly quickly in a moment through a 4-point outline of some suggestions. You know, over the years when I would attend something and do attend something like this, my hope is that I can carry away one thing, or at least one thing, one idea, one quote, one story, one insight that will be helpful. And I hope that will be the case for you all. We're learning, and we're learning together. And in the area at the intersection of stewardship and the preaching of the gospel, that's something we're working at on a regular basis together. And if we can help one another, I'm glad to be a part of that. Just as a backdrop, this last 3 or 4, I guess 4 spring terms, I have taught a course that's not in my academic field. I don't really have the credentials to teach it. My field is New Testament and the Gospel of John and biblical theology. But the course that I've been teaching is called Pastoral Leadership. And the gist of the course was everything but Sunday. So not sacrament, not liturgy, not preaching in the general sense, but everything else under the sun, the many, many things that lay leaders and clergy in the churches are expected to do with real excellence and certainly with competence, whether it's finance, development, and stewardship, whether it's pastoral care, visitation, and counsel, whether it's education and youth work and children's ministry, whether it's conflict resolution and community life, whether it's denominational engagement, whether any number of things. The list is lengthy, not endless, but lengthy. And within that course, one of the requirements for each of the class members is that they write a stewardship sermon. Okay, so we drift into Sunday, at least at that sense, but a stewardship sermon. And initially the students, I think, wonder, why is he asking me to do that? The reason is that it comes upon you, and there it is, and you may not have had any thought about it or preparation for it or need to think too much about it, and boop, it's Saturday night before Stewardship Sunday, and like the old funny story about the man who woke up and said, I don't want to go to church. And his spouse said, why not? And he said, it's Stewardship Sunday. I don't want to go to church on Stewardship Sunday. She said, well, you have to. And he said, why? And he said, you're the preacher. You have to go. It's Stewardship Sunday. So that's where we are coming in. What I'd like to shift toward from that is that these moments in listening and speaking, in the shared ministry of the community, lay and clergy, really can be wonderful moments. Okay, so here are some things that, and David asked for a handful of sort of signposts or things to think about. So I'll go through those and then we'll turn to David and see where we're going to go from there. The first is a difficult word to define, but we know it when we feel it and see it. And that the hope would be that these moments of stewardship, sermon preaching or preaching about stewardship or preaching at the intersection of life, gospel, and the care and conduct of the community and our use of our resources might be personal or spiritual, that it might have some flesh and blood, that it might have some heart, that it might have soul, that it might have some people involved. I know one of the failings in preaching for me, my dad, who died in 2010, used to say a lot of sermons stumble because there aren't enough illustrations, and I think he might have added, and there aren't enough appropriate or fit illustrations, so that when I use the word spiritual, I'm really talking about people, about where are the people in this set of stories. I think back to the years 1981 to 1984 when we were in the far north country and served in a Methodist church in Burke, New York. That's the home, if you read the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, Little House on the Prairie, it's the home of Almanzo Wilder and the setting for the book Farmer Boy. And there was a woman named Setta Moe who was elderly when we met her. And she told just a captivating story that stays with me about how the beautiful stained glass in that otherwise very modest village country church came into the life of the community. That was that she went door to door, had a mission, had something in mind, and thought, I'm going to give and I'm going to ask. And really, when it comes to stewardship, there are just two things. You've got to give yourself and you got to ask yourself. And she did those, and I can see her smiling many years, decades after she had done what she did. It was a spiritual thing for her. And she went out and did what she needed to do to get those conic stained glass windows into the very simple country church in Burke, New York, which was founded in the early 19th century. So that's one. Second is evangelical, and here I have a particular twist for this, or an emphasis here, and that is that I know that I need to be invited to change, grow, develop when it comes to the hearing of the gospel. I never get a chance to hear enough sermons and try and keep regular in reading and listening to sermons, especially those of us who are called on to preach on a regular basis, probably need to nourish ourselves as fully as we can in hearing, seeing, hearing, reading sermons. But within that there be a capacity for an interest in, or a willingness to call people to change a little bit, to think about how your resources are being used, and to be evangelistic. Going out to clean the pasture spring, I'll only stop to rake the leaves away and wait to watch the water clear I may. I shan't be gone long. You come too. Here is a happy area. Here is something that will make life deeper and better and more meaningful. And it may not sound that way at the start, but when there's a chance to engage and to be evangelical about it, to call for a fuller discipleship that can make a difference, I think. Not to be, harsh about it or anything like that, but to be welcoming, invitational, inclusive, and evangelical in that sense. By the way, David, earlier on, I guess it was Ted, said something about, and it's true that a large percentage of the verses in the scripture attributed to Jesus are about money. And that's a good point to make continually. I think about our Ithaca church. So this is the late 70s, early 80s, and Cornell faculty and so on. One of whom was an astronomer, and his spouse, Charlotte, was just a wonderfully creative person. She would say anything to anybody. She was not technically a member of the church. There were reasons for that, but she was a real leader. And our district superintendent, Bill Swales, came around and gave some words on stewardship and said, Jesus talked more about money than anything else. And she looked him right in the eye and said, well, I thought it was love, Bill. I thought it was love. Anyway, I thought, now there is somebody. And he said, well, they got into it a little bit. In other words, to invite people to think about some form of growth, development, change. The third one. So something of a spiritual dimension, something of an evangelical dimension, something is, the third is a scriptural dimension. And here, I don't just mean the recitation of scripture, although that can be a fair project. I mean, is it rooted and grounded in what the scripture actually teaches about stewardship? And I'll just give one example. It's one of my favorites. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians in the 8th chapter. It's a beautiful rendition of a lot of things related to Christian discipleship and stewardship. He has this phrase where he says, Paul writes, teaching the Corinthians, let those who have much not have too much, and let those who have little not have too little. I find that compelling. Let those who have much not have too much, and let those who have little not have too little, recognizing there are going to be differences, but trying to bring a communal, shared sense about the use of reason. That's one example. As was said, there are lots of many examples, including in the parables, some of them fascinating. The parable of the dishonest steward comes to mind, but I'm not going to go down the scriptural route. We'd be here all day. And then the fourth, and is to feel the joy in it. And that may be counterintuitive because, as it can be a challenge to think about how to be creative and imaginative and engaging and not go too far in any particular direction, but really try and help people think about stewardship. But if there's a little bit of gladness, a little bit of sense of humor, a little bit of self-deprecation, a little bit of joy in it, that can help. That Sunday ought to be, if possible, a really happy one. And it's not just necessarily one Sunday, it can go on forever. So, David, that's my word. I'm sticking to it. Spiritual, evangelical, scriptural, and joyful.
Thank you very much, Bob. I greatly appreciate that, and great perspectives on how to come forward. And this applies not just to those who are preaching the word, but also those who are hearing it, as we have some lay folks with us today. So what I want to do now is I am going to share the sermon that Bob has shared with us. Invite you to listen. For some of you, you'll find familiar images. And then when we're done, we'll come back and we'll talk with Bob. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. That way we can get to them and we'll answer them as soon as we're done with this message. So let me see if I can get this to where I want it to be. And just you love it when YouTube works, except for when it doesn't. Can you hear that? Nope. Okay, hold on just a second. Stop the share. I thought I had handled that. Let's do this one more time. That would do it.
Indicative. Goodness with track shoes on. None is good but God. With God, all things are possible. Today we acclaim, celebrate the goodness, the generosity of God. That word goodness in the New Testament here, and especially in Galatians 5:22, agathosune, means goodness that is active. Goodness in the present active indicative. Goodness with track shoes on. Goodness at work. Behold the goodness, the generosity of God. On this rainy New England working Sunday, somehow I am reminded of a Sunday years ago in the Southwest, in the sunshine, a day free. What a treat for one who makes his living by the sweat of his jaw to have a Sunday free. I skipped breakfast, went to church, found lunch, drove to the site of the football game, Cardinals and Giants, hoping to find a ticket. I passed by the scalpers, went to the ticket office, and there stood. After a while, a burly bloke came toward us. It was a long line. And there he stood in Cardinals shirt and Cardinals hat and Cardinals socks and Cardinals pants. He had on his back a beverage backpack with a plastic lip guide, and he was wearing a hat that had two wings on it that flapped cardinal-like, so that when he moved, his hat did too. He was altogether an apocalyptic surprise. After a moment, he looked us in the eye and said, "I have two $50 tickets. I don't want to sell them. I want to give them away." Do you know, there was dead silence. No one responded. Perhaps it was partly his presence, but mostly it was the surprise of his generosity. We didn't really know what to do. He said, "These are free. They're on the 30-yard line, 18 seats up, 18 rows up. I want to give them away. Who will have them?" Silence, no response. Finally, in a bit of a tiff, he handed them toward the ticket counter and said, "You give them away," at which point yours truly, not born yesterday, said, "Thank you very much. I'll be glad to have them." But you know, walking to the turnstile, I realized as I came toward it that I only needed one ticket. I had two. So I turned to the crowd there and said, "I have a free $50 ticket. I'd like to give it to somebody. I don't want to sell it. Who would like it?" Silence, no response. Again, I asked, and you know, they wondered, and no one came. Finally, a fellow came forward and said, "All right, buddy, I don't know what your agenda is, but I'll take it." There is something so surprising about the fullness of generosity. The divine generosity surprises us, gives us a seat, gives us space, and seduces us into living our own generous lives as well. There's a surprising quality to the divine generosity. What a privilege over many years to look back at the giving that women and men have done. I think of a woman coming in and laying a substantial check on the desk and saying, "For whatever you'd like to use this, here is support." I think of a friend offering his seacoast home when we needed a place to stay for a wedding. I think of a person who had received pastoral care and went ahead and endowed a position in pastoral care. I think of the generosity of Marsh Chapel. Marsh Chapel flourishes because of the reflective generosity of its people, women and men, one who sees and hears and does and gives, who is blessed and so then blesses. Do you know, you only have what you can give away. You only finally truly possess what you have the power and freedom to give away. But you know that. You are giving people. I think of the groups and communities who have lived the divine generosity and so surprised those all around them. Salt and light they are. It's in the scripture in full, the 33rd Psalm. The earth is full of the hesed of the Lord, the generosity of the Lord. Romans 15, you are full too of generosity. 2 Corinthians 9, the Lord loves a cheerful giver. Galatians 6, let us watch over one another in love. And Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount, if anyone asks for your coat, give your cloak. If he asks for 1 mile, go with him 2 as well. You think of those parables of sowing and reaping and that blessing we hope to hear at the end of time from a greater light and from a farther shore. Well done, here is the word in Greek, thou generous and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of the master. There is a surprise, a jolt in the experience of divine generosity. Look about you. Everything in this chapel, its pulpit, its glass, its organ, its pews, its program, its ministry are here because somebody made a decision to see it so. That surprise, that divine generosity surprising us, can open up space for others. Oh, I know we like to support particular projects, I do as well as any, but there is another reality pressing upon us this day that reminds us that the future of wonder and morality and generosity are found here, right here, and in similar spaces and communities. The seeds are being planted in the minds and hearts of young adults here today with regard to what the world will look like 40, 50, 60 years from now. Generosity opens a space for others. I see it week by week. Just 1 week, in less than 5 days, I saw, these are all people in their early 20s, one writing and publishing his own poems, one growing in a capacity to mature as a preacher, one studying economics now and into the future, one deciding to get and to be married at an early age, all signs of space opened for a hopeful future. Generosity opened space, some years ago, after our daughter had gone off to college and we no longer had much experience with a teenage girl nearby. Friends of ours asked if we would for 3 days watch their 2 young teenage daughters. And I thought we might be a little rusty, so I was frankly hesitant, but I went to the spiritual leader of our home and Jan said, it'll be fine, bring them along. And for those 3 days, we had again what we once had loved. The joyful laughter of siblings together, the mirth and playfulness of 14 and 15-year-olds. And now that their mom has gone to glory, to the church triumphant, and now that they are finished studying, one is just finishing a PhD in public health at Harvard as we speak. I wouldn't give those 3 days up for all the tea in China, for a king's ransom. Real generosity causes us, sometimes against a prevailing wind, to make space, find a seat, whether it's on the 30-yard line or the 60-yard line for somebody else. That's the divine generosity and its impress upon us. It's a serious existential claim. Real generosity encourages us, even seduces us into becoming generous ourselves. We see it every season, here and now. Thank goodness for the goodness of the salt and light represented in these very pews. And at Boston University, generally. This week, this last fortnight, I have been thinking about Jane Addams speaking about encouraging generosity. Some of you will remember that 140 years ago, Jane Addams, almost alone to start, began what became in our history as a country the most potent, powerful urban ministry to the poor. Jane Addams grew up in Rockford, Illinois, but decided to invest herself in the city of Chicago, and there she built Hull House. And through it, she inspected factories for safety, and through it, she organized operas and music and theater in the streets, and through it, she developed a national voice on behalf of the poor decades before suffrage, we might add. She became an exemplar of generosity, the divine generosity seducing us to mirror God's generosity with our own. Here is what she wrote. The blessings that we associate with a cultivated and refined life must become universal if they are to be secure, she wrote. The good we procure for ourselves is precarious, uncertain, floating in midair, unless it is secured for all and made a part of our common life. You know, you are such good listeners, I might just leave that, assuming that you connect with the reference to our place and time, but just to be sure. Over the last 3 weeks as a community, we have rightly been anxious about theft and robbery along Commonwealth Avenue. And through the good work of police, the alleged perpetrators have been apprehended, and we are thankful and we are less anxious. We recognize that those so acting need to be brought to justice. But friend, the point for this life is not to catch a thief only. Our point, our life, is to catch up with thievery. The point is not to apprehend one robber or three, as important as that is. The point is to catch up with robbery itself. Where does this behavior come from? What kind of society, culture, community, history, economic structure produces this? Now, maybe with that just before us here on Commonwealth Avenue, you can hear Jane Addams' warning. The blessings that we associate with a life of refinement and cultivation, she wrote, must become universal if they are to be secure. The good we procure for ourselves is precarious, uncertain, floating in midair, unless it is secured for all and made a part of our common life. Those who founded Boston University, Isaac Rich and others, knew that. Those who through Boston University celebrated and ran Goodwill Industry knew that. Those who built Marsh Chapel for Howard Thurman and Martin King and others knew that. Those who not long ago invested 2 decades in the public education of Chelsea knew that. We've got bigger fish to fry and a world to address and a culture near and far to convert. Thank goodness for the divine generosity, embracing and guiding. You know, it was Christopher Lash who taught me about Jane Addams. He said, Jane Addams, early in her life, had an experience. A little part of her heart was freed, and in the freeing of that part, all the rest of her life, Jane Addams' life, was released. I just wonder whether this Sunday, this week, there is a part of your soul, your spirit, maybe a part near to the wallet area, we will presume, which once freed up in generosity, in the practice of tithing, in disciplined giving, will just free up all of the rest. Beloved, hear the good news of divine generosity, so surprising, so spacious, so seductive. It reminds us of a 18th century Anglican cleric who spent almost all of his adult life living on 60 pounds sterling a year and just giving away the rest. Mr. John Wesley, in whose heritage we stand and whose poem we
we will make our own. Do all the good you can, at all the times you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Hear the good news. There is none good but God alone. With God, all things are possible.
All right. So I want to invite you, I'm going to take a couple minutes before Bob starts answering questions. There are some things that Bob pointed out, the guideposts that he talked about, feeling joy, scripturally rooted, not just quoting scripture, evangelical, the willingness to call people to change, the personal, the spirit, the heart, the soul, and those type of things. If you would be willing, in the chat, can you lift up a point that you encountered where you experienced one or more of those things? Maybe there was an individual that you heard him talking about, a story that stuck to you, just to share some things out with others so that we can all get a perspective on what touched us in this sermon that Bob shared with us today. Bob, one of the things that I noticed, and we'll get to folks' questions and their comments in just a minute, but one of the things that I noticed was you didn't talk about the church budget. And I can't help but think that the man who did not want to get out of bed to preach that Sunday was thinking, how do I talk about the church budget? How do I make it interesting to people? Because what I heard was discipleship. I heard an opportunity for people. That sermon could have been preached any week of the year. So just a quick reflection on that thought process. Is that intentional? Do you think that's a concern that people have or that laity have about hearing for those 4 weeks of the year?
Is that to me, David? Or
yes, yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and you're right, this particular stewardship sermon didn't address actual budgetary needs. And some of that is our situation at Marsh Chapel, but some of it is just the way the sermon came together and moved forward. That said, I do think that one small piece of the sermon has to do with where the future of the sources of wonder itself and morality itself and future generosity itself are going to come from. And then in other settings, one might have gone through, or I might have gone through, look at what you're doing. And I'll take a riff from our previous assignment in Rochester, I think of, where on Stewardship Sunday, I would say, thanks to your generosity, we're able to feed 20,000 meals a week through the Dining Caring Center. Thanks to your generosity, we're able to send a mission trip to Honduras every other year. Thanks to your generosity, we're able to support mission and work through the denomination each year. Thanks to your generosity, we can support daycare, children's ministry, nursery school, youth group, and so on, to exemplify some of what the ongoing giving of the church is doing. But there are other settings for that as well. And what I'm more, if I can put it this way, interested in is getting to the heart. Some autumns ago, maybe 30, 25 anyway, 30, I stood on the corner of Comstock Avenue and near Calvin in Syracuse, New York. And I was talking to Neil Fisher, who happens to be with us today. Hi, Neil. And Hal Garman, who is a BU grad, and Neil and Hal have known each other I'm in the ministry in part because of Hal Garman. Because at age 16, I was at age 16, Hal, who was running something in the city of Syracuse called Priority One. And Priority One in 1971 or two was combating racism. And he said, I don't have much money to give you, Bob, but I think you should come and work for us. You should come and work for us. Why don't you come and work for us? And I did. And to some degree, the rest is history. Now I'm a pretty big disappointment to my parents in many ways, one of which is that I never went to Boston University, their alma mater. I never went to School of Theology, my dad's alma mater. But I was affected by, influenced by your New England University that has had for a long time a combination of that Methodist balance of deep personal faith and active social involvement. It's how to get at the wellspring of that, the trigger to that. And that's more what I'm interested in come a sermon on Stewardship Sunday. So, but I'm not also not, I recognize the need to do the other as well.
So those of you who have been here, what questions might you have that you'd like to ask Bob pertaining to his message, pertaining to some of the questions you've had around preaching on stewardship, just pertaining to stewardship itself? And go ahead and raise your hand physically, and I can see you all. I've got you all on my screen. And we'll go from there.
Going on. Maybe while they're thinking, David, let me just say one thing that might draw some out. Jane Addams is important to me in part because she came to faith in life through a heartfelt awakening, and then the rest was history. And her story stays with me. And speaking of which, you know, my grandmother was born in 1893, and she didn't get to vote until 1920. Isn't that right? And yeah. My goodness. And what I'm saying is that for Jane Addams, the same was the case. Whatever. We should be celebrating more what was done 100 years ago than we have done some, but we've maybe continue to do so.
Yeah. Zandra, you had a question? You need to unmute yourself.
You got me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a lay person, and I'm going to be involved in stewardship this coming year. And I'm just looking for ideas in terms of, like, I have nothing to do with the stewardship sermon or message. And we send out a letter in our church generally to all the members about stewardship. And I can see how generosity and some of these things we were talking about would be very, very prevalent, relevant. But I'm kind of curious as to what churches do during that period of stewardship, that month. We've had guests or speakers, members of the church talk about stewardship. But I'm sort of trying to think out of the box as to what possibilities there could be. I did attend a church down in Florida last year, stewardship, and they had a series of films that they used for stewardship. You know, not just that Sunday. The pastor did, a message on one of the Sundays, but I guess as a lay member involved in stewardship for the congregation and not involved in the message as a pastor, any ideas from all you folks or any of you folks how I could approach that? Is that clear? Am I kind of?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Maybe it's not appropriate. for this discussion, but what grabbed me was when you said, think outside the box in your presentation. I said, that's for me.
Well, before others jump in or say what they would are moved to say, Sandra, the first thing I'd say is I'm so delighted that you're involved in the work and stewardship. This class I teach, one of the things I say off and on is, if you have to have one committee in the church, if you only had one, have the stewardship committee, not just because the work is so important, but because the people, the women and men who are willing to work on a stewardship committee, they are the salt of the earth. They are salt and light, and it's fun. So I'll get to the quick answer, Sandra, to your good question, because I have a specific, and others may do as well. We, when we were finishing up in Rochester, we built a building, and it was at that time, since the early 70s, it wasn't the church itself, it was an addition, but it was the largest new build in a long time. It was a risk. And we actually delayed coming over to Boston. The building was done. We delayed a year. We hadn't finished raising the money, which we did. But my friend Bob Payne, who was the stewardship chair, would come over in his car with the back seat with some Diet Dr. Pepper in the back seat. And he and I drove around to see the people. This is a church by that point had 2,400 members, and a lot of them hadn't had the opportunity to give to the support of the building that they would be using and their children would be using for a long time. So we would drive around. He had the map, and I would just go and knock on the door and greet and say, here's the packet, and we love you, and pray. And some people gave, and over time that planted a seed. So that sideways, personal visitation, not necessarily asking for a card or a pledge, but there's no substitute for personal visitation in the home, in the hospital, workplace, over the phone, by Zoom if need be, but just being with people. I'm committed to that, so I'll give that. The second one though is not so much the sermon, but if you have women and men who are willing to give a minute for mission or a witness to what caused their faithfulness in this area. So to stand and say for 3 to 5 minutes, hi, I'm Sandra, and here's how I happen to get involved in this, or here's the person who taught me by example, or here's what my parents instilled in me, or here's how I found the joy of giving and realized that you really only have what you have the power and freedom to give away. What you possess, oddly, is what you only fully possess what you have the willingness to give away. Otherwise, you're stuck on other things. So that, and others probably have had that experience. The thing is, it's got to be concise, and it's got to be focused and practiced, done at a high level of excellence, which is wonderful to do, but it takes, it's harder to speak for 3 minutes than it is to speak for 30 minutes. And so those are some thoughts that come to mind.
Okay, thank you.
But not in the way of others in response to a good question.
So, Sandra, one of the things that Bob may or may not have intentionally done was, you'll notice that he didn't talk about why you give to the church, but it's more of a response to God. And then, so the churches today, what I'm finding are, they need to be showing why people would give to God through their ministry.
God, come on.
I heard something, but I missed it. But no, so I don't know which part of that came through or what didn't. But it's the idea of responding to God through the church, and the church saying, here this is why, as he shared all those celebrations. So,
Okay,
other
thank you.
comments or thoughts and questions? necessary.
So I'll jump in.
Certainly.
So Zandra, I'd say, we all like this idea that there could be this neat little 4 to 6 weeks that takes care of all this. But what is woven under everything Dean Hill has been saying is it's that long-term investment in relationship and continuing that it's talked about, that generosity is emphasized throughout the year. When he talks about visitation, it wasn't just for a capital campaign. He calls his members, and throughout the year, make sure he calls everyone. And at Christmas time, he has a list of people that he calls and continues to develop those relationships. So it's, there's importance to what we do in those 4 to 6 weeks, but it's the whole year and the year after and the year before.
Yeah, I think that's really an important thing. It's not in that set part of time, but it should be.
Right. Yeah.
Everything
Because when he said the name of his class is Everything But Sunday, and that it doesn't talk about the sacraments, it is all about the sacraments, and it's about how you live the sacraments. So.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And if you're interested, next month, our foundation forum is going to be Raise Around the Clock. It's the idea of stewardship, year-round stewardship. And we'll be talking about the different aspects of it. Raise Around the Clock, if you're as old as I am, you remember there was a Rock Around the Clock song from many, many years ago. And so that's sort of the praise that we're going to be doing it. So next month, the information will be coming up shortly about a webinar that I'll be leading in that area. Other thoughts, questions that you have about the sermon, questions that you have as a layperson. How do I get, well, here's Bob, here's one for you. As a layperson, how do I empower my pastor to feel confident to speak, maybe not around the budget, but around generosity on a regular basis?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is not big news, but bears, I think, some attention and repetition. Humanly speaking, 90% and more of what happens in the life of a church is done through solid, strong lay leadership. So it's really the laity of the church that carry forward the mission and ministry of the church. Now, to get to that, you've got to have the right source of ministerial leadership too. So that also is the issue. But the budget of the church only describes a certain part of what's happening in staffing and mission and apportionment and building and all. The outlay of the church is in trained, disciplined outworking of the laity in ministry and volunteer service and other. And that, I think, is, I mean, it's sort of, we know it and it's sort of simple, but on the other hand, if you're not continuously focused on that, you can miss a great deal. So that would be a general statement about the laity. I think finding ways to participate in a Minute for Mission or on the committee or something like that can be helpful. But I also think just where there, let's try it this way. Where you see a story or a narrative or an example or something that's really meaningful to you and you can tell your minister, your pastor about it, that may spur something in her or him. And might develop into a sermon illustration or something like that. Because all that happens in a 20-minute sermon, and it ought to be very, very assiduously addressed and worked on, 20-hour Fosdick rule, 20 hours a week on the sermon, if you can manage it, an hour for every minute in the pulpit, and written and rewritten and memorized and practiced and delivered. That's hard to do on a 52-week basis, but it's a wonderful challenge and opportunity and privilege. But to get to that, sometimes it helps to have the community of faith telling some stories together. And then one other, and you've probably done some of this, you know, just to have some time over a dinner, for instance, or maybe at Christmas time, or where the laity of the church can express what they have known of goodness and of generosity and of giving. I'm thinking of a dinner in our Syracuse church where Bob Fisk, who hardly said a word on Sunday, stood up and gave thanks for surviving his experience in the Second World War. He had been one of a crew on a bomber mission coming regularly out of London, and he survived. And he remembered a Christmas Eve where he lit candles in the back of the plane and they sang Silent Night. And anyway, he was deeply moved and grateful for what he had been through and by grace had survived. And that kind of story told around a table or a large table can make a difference too.